right, welcome. Thank you for joining us on the virtual town hall question and answer session about the Churchill Avenue alternatives. My name is Eileen Goodwin with Apex Strategies, and I'm part of the AECOM team that's been working on the grade separations in Palo Alto. Joining me today are city staff members and other members from the AECOM team, and they will introduce themselves as their part in today's session becomes live. I do want to also call out that Elliot Wong will be referred to, and he is working all of the magic behind the scenes to make this a more interactive session so that you will have visuals to go along with some of the answers that are provided. And when people call on Elliot, that's who he is. He is an engineer with AECOM. So hopefully you've had a chance to look around our virtual town hall and or attended one of our in-person sessions prior to the shelter in place going into place last March. The Churchill Avenue alternatives have been presented live, and all of that information is on our virtual website. And we hope that you are at least somewhat familiar with the alternatives. And if you aren't, it's strongly suggested that you log out of this session and make yourself aware of all the different opportunities and alignments and alternatives and the work that's been done so that this Q&A session is more relevant to you when you log back in. This session is about answering questions that have been provided online. There is no live aspect to this. So once we're finished today, this afternoon, once we log off, this will be immediately posted to the virtual town hall, which can be accessed through connectingpaloalto.com. And partway through this session, we'll make you a little bit familiar with all the materials that are on there. But we're hoping, as I said, that most of you who are attending today have some familiarity with the project, because then the question and answer session will be much more fruitful for you. We have collected general feedback, and if you've participated in the virtual town hall, you know that not only are we asking questions about the various alternatives, but also some more questions that are more general in nature. And I'll be going through of the data that's been collected so far to give you a sense of what you and your neighbors are giving us feedback so far, and I think you'll find that very interesting. It's our expectation that we will be updating that information when we do our session next week that is focused on Churchill and Meadow. And we'll do a little update for the the Charleston Meadow is next September 3rd at 4 o'clock in a similar format. And we'll also give an update on our Churchill feedback by then. And we'll have specific information on Charleston Meadow at that time, as well as an update on our general questions so that you'll see the additional feedback that comes in between now and then. As I mentioned, there is no live question and answer session today. We're asking that those who are watching, if you have additional questions, even after we answer those today or during this session, that you go ahead and give us that feedback on our virtual town hall, which again, you can find on connectingpaloalto.com. So how this session is going to work is we'll do a general feedback report here in just a moment. And then we'll move into the Churchill alternatives where you'll be able to see the information that's been provided on the website. Then I'll do a brief update on the feedback we've gathered so far on the specific Churchill area alternatives, sort of the pace and the flavor of the feedback that we're getting. And then we'll move into a live with the panelists section where I'll be asking questions that we've taken from the website, and all of our city's team and our consultant team will be available to answer those questions for you and give you that information. And as I mentioned, we also are going to be using the website so that we can show you in the virtual town hall where you can go and get this information and do a deeper dive on your own. And we have broken down the questions to having general questions first, and then Churchill specific questions. And then at the end, I'll be reiterating the information about next week's session, which is Charleston Meadow. So that's how today's session is going to go. And we really appreciate your attendance. And again, because this will be posted, if you know people who would be interested in seeing this information, or if you wanted to go through it again, this will be available for you at the very end of this session. It'll be immediately be posted on the website. So again, we welcome your participation in this, and you're certainly welcome to go back as many times as you need to our virtual town hall and continue to provide this very valuable information for the project team. Next. So what I wanted to do was to start with, let's see who's been on the town hall and generally where they're coming from. And if you haven't done it already, there's a separate area where you basically get to click on a bunch of questions that are not alternative related. They're related to who you are and what neighborhood you reside in or potentially represent. And as you can see, Southgate is very well represented so far, as well as University South, the Green Meadow area, a little bit from Midtown, certainly Old Palo Alto, et cetera. So this is a pie chart that's come off of only 40 answered questions, because some of the people, there have been about 100 people that have weighed in on the alternatives, but only about 40 people have come and done the demographics section yet. So it gives you an idea of the population. As I said, we're very, very hopeful that as more people get on the website and provide feedback, that this pie will certainly change, and we'll be able to share that information as it develops. Next. So we asked people about how they heard about the virtual town hall. And for those of you who have attended a live meeting, this is always something that I ask the audience, because it's very, very informational for the team to know what's working, what seems to be where people find their information. You are allowed to answer everything that applies. So it's not a one vote situation. As you can see, email is very, very popular way that people found out about it. And we did do some proactive emailing from the city to people that attended meetings. And I think that is probably what that represents there. There have been some stories in the newspaper. There's been a website, and people have seen it in the website. Word of mouth, of course, is very popular. There's a community group called the XCAP, and they have a live session. And some people said that's where they first heard about it. And then, of course, we've had some feedback called other. So we're very much looking at that and seeing how we can get the word out even further. And we're hoping that those of you who are on here today are spreading the word that the website exists, and we're very interested in getting feedback. Next. Okay, so we're excited here to see that almost half the people that went on felt that this was a good experience. And if we add in the very good, which is another almost 20%, well, we're well into the 2/3 kind of a situation here, which is very positive for an online experience. Fair is about 1/4 of the people, and then a few people found that it wasn't very satisfying. So we, of course, asked people why that is the case, and believe me that the project team is looking at those answers as well. So we really appreciate people giving us general feedback on the virtual town hall. Next. So as I mentioned earlier, the comments that are more about you have been about 40 responses, but 102 have come in about the alternatives. Of course, that 40 is within the 102. So just wanted to show you that more people got excited about giving us feedback on the alternatives than they did about themselves. Next. So one of our key questions in the general feedback has been, has there been enough analysis done to decide amongst all the different choices that we have, not only at Churchill, but also at Charleston Meadow? And as you can see, this is fairly evenly split now. There was only 36 people who answered, but it's pretty even. So this was a question that also has been asked in our live meetings previously. And again, those results were fairly similar, and that's why we're still in the process. So we'll be interested to see as the website becomes more used, whether this trends in a different way or stays fairly evenly split. So it'll be something we'll all be watching for. Next. Okay, and then we also asked what those people who have participated in the virtual website, what they think are the most important factors are in evaluating any one of the alternatives. And as you can see here at the top, bike flow is very, very popular, along with cost. And pedestrian flow has been very important, and traffic flow. A little bit less is noise and vibration, aesthetics, and I think probably some of those are probably related to where folks are, how close they are to the corridor, and that sort of thing. So this again will be very interesting to see how dynamically it changes as more people log in and are able to give their personal feedback here. But it is interesting. We definitely have some values that are coming out very strongly, including flow of all the modes, and then of course the cost of the projects. Next. And now I'm going to turn it over to Elliot, who will walk us through the virtual town hall and really focused in on the Churchill alternatives, just to remind everybody who's here what resources are available online. Elliot?
Thank you, Eileen. So quick reminder for everybody that hasn't accessed the Palo Alto virtual town hall. So in order for us to actually go into a deep dive for the Churchill Avenue alternatives, you will be paying attention to the table where there is the city limits, and on it there's two buttons. Churchill Avenue is what you want to click on. So a single left click will bring up the alternative screen. Within this alternative screen, there are four choices, or the four alternatives that's currently on the table. So the closure with the option 1 under pedestrian undercrossing, with the option 2 pedestrian undercrossing as well, the viaduct, as well as the partial underpass. And then let's have a quick look at one of these. So for example, the viaduct, a new overlay should appear. With it, there's two parts. There is the screen on top, as well as a new overlay of the model on the bottom, on the tabletop. So within the screen, you have access to the planning sections that we typically produce. You have the animation, and this time it's narrated with a little bit of background music. We've got the fact sheets for you to download, as well as the renderings. To access these, a single left click would bring it up and enlarge the material. For you to have a quick look at what the alternative would look like, have a look at the tabletop. There are these blue tags. Each one of these are 360 degrees camera angles for you to take a look. So let's go into one of these. It should load. There we go. And this would be one of the renderings that we have produced, simulating the model of viaduct or whichever alternative that is on the table in the local environment. And to navigate around this, a single left click and then drag will allow you to view this in the 360 degrees. To exit out of all of the materials, either click on the shaded area or click on this blue cross. And then finally, to get you back out into the main room location, click on this, go back to alternative selection. This is where the alternative feedback form will pop up. And we do urge you to fill in as much as you can for this feedback so that we can hear your voice and kind of see where you guys are feeling towards all of these alternatives. And with that, I'll pass it back to Eileen.
Thank you, Elliot. So I want to let everyone listening know that we are going to be having the virtual town hall open through Labor Day. So that's an easy thing to remember. You can go on, it's available 24 hours a day on the weekends. You can go in and out of the town hall as many times as you like. Please share it with your friends and family and your neighbors. As we said, we're very, very interested in getting all of your feedback. So the next thing we wanted to do was to show, again, with a population of about 100 people who weighed in, but not everybody weighed in on all the options related to Churchill. So we wanted to show you where the results are so far. And the first one, as was mentioned by Elliot, was option 1, closes Churchill, but also has a certain type of a bicycle pedestrian alternative that we wanted to get feedback on. And as you can see here, people don't particularly care for this, but again, the sample size is small. We have 4 people saying, yes, it's good. 1 person's pretty neutral, and then 8 have said that they're thinking this is not a very good option. So then the next one is, of course, a Churchill closure with mitigations, which is a different one, a different configuration of how bicycle peds would get around. And then we were asking folks, what do you think about this one? And this one, as you can see, there's no one who's neutral about it. And we have many more good results than we did from the first one. And but there's still some folks who don't really care for it. And it looks to me like people switch places, and then our neutral person thought this one was bad, but we never know because we can't track to that level. But it's interesting to see the difference between the 2 options. And then we also asked about the viaduct. And just to remind you, this is where the train would be up in the air. And this one is seen, as you can see, as not really adored by the community. There's a lot of people who have marked bad on this one, but we do have a couple people who felt it was okay and some that are neutral. So that one is trending that way. And then finally, we have the partial underpass. And this would be where the street would go under the railroad tracks. And as you can see, this one has a lot of neutrality coming out, as well as people who feel both that this would be very good and some people who don't care for it at all. It's trending fairly close. So this one needs a lot more people to log in and give us some feedback before we'll see any kind of firm trend on the underpass alternative. Okay, and so when you aggregate those, we have 35, 5 people skipped it. We have closure with mitigations. We have the viaduct, which is not as popular, and then the partial overpass, which seem to have more respondents, more popularity. So what do we wanted to do now, as I mentioned, is move more towards a live situation where I'll be asking the questions that we've pulled from the website. And then I'll be asking some of our team here to answer those questions. And the first several questions go to the city staff. So let's jump right in. So why isn't leaving the at-grade crossing as it is being considered? And so Phil, could you introduce yourself and take that first question for us?
Yeah, thanks, Eileen. I'm Philip Cami, Chief Transportation Official, and thank you all for joining us. The Connecting Palo Alto fact sheet that can be found in the virtual town hall and on connectingpaloalto.com provides us a really nice overview of information regarding this question. Elliot, it looks like you're already moving towards it. Can you show us where to find the fact sheets in the virtual town hall? So it's right there on the end of the table. Yeah. So this is a sheet that I'd refer everyone to review regarding this question. Caltrain's currently in the process of electrifying their trains as part of their effort to increase both frequency and capacity. This increase in trains will increase the gate downtime and will cause more delays to all modes of transportation. And under electrification, the gates will be down for 15% of the peak hour times. So due to this, the traffic buildup and backup would become excessive. So leaving the at-grade crossings as is, or the no-build option, which this question is asking, it would be considered and evaluated as part of the environmental process.
Thank you. All right, on to question number 2. Since Caltrain ridership has decreased significantly due to COVID, should we be making a decision about any of this until ridership increases? And Phil, you get this one too.
Thank you. City staff believes that the transit decrease associated with the pandemic and also the economic downturn, while are currently significant, they're temporary situations. And both Caltrain and high-speed rail are currently moving forward. So, in consideration of the time that it will take for grade separations to be built and the long-term plans, staff believes that we should continue moving forward with this process.
Thank you. Question 3. Is Caltrain's corridor-wide grade separation study needed for the city to make a decision?
Thank you. The Caltrain corridor-wide grade separation study will look at the entire 3-county Caltrain region for grade separation coordination. And this effort will supplement the city efforts by providing additional information that we can build upon for our selected alternative, but they're really independent efforts.
Okay, thank you, Phil. All right, question number 4. How have the economic and social consequences from the pandemic impacted the city council's decision-making process with regard to the rail crossing agenda?
As I mentioned a little bit earlier, projects like these grade separations are significant projects, and they're multi-year long-term projects. They take quite a while to construct and to go through all the steps to build. So typically the impacts of an economic downturn are not as lasting, and typically they diminish within 2 to 5 years. So it's really much shorter than the planning and construction horizon for a project like grade separation. So we're cautiously proceeding with these alternatives while monitoring the other regional transportation plans and efforts under consideration. And it's also worth noting that during the last economic downturn, the federal government made funding available for infrastructure projects under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So if something similar were to occur in this situation, Palo Alto should be in a position to apply for this funding.
Great, thank you, Phil. Question number 5. When will a decision be made? And I think this goes back to you.
Thank you. We have a community advisory panel, the XCAP, which has been tasked by the council to recommend preferred alternatives. And the XCAP is currently deliberating. In fact, they just started deliberations on the 26th of August, which was yesterday when we're recording this live. In addition to feedback from the town hall would also be considered by the council. And the XCAP plans to take their final report and recommendation to council this fall, following their deliberations. And we're also hoping to have a recommended alternative selected by council by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. Number 6, who will pay to design and construct the grade separation alternative once it's selected?
Okay, Elliot, can you show the funding page in the virtual town hall? I think it's funding financial. It's over here on this green panel that has a lot of great information on it as well regarding the finances and the funding. But typically, similar projects to this require a combination of funding sources to complete construction. But for this specific project, the grade separation in Santa Clara County, voters have approved the countywide sales tax measure, Measure B, which was initially estimated to be approximately $700 million that would be available for the 8 grade crossings in Santa Clara County, of which 4 of them are within Palo Alto. So, the city would need to be leveraging that funding along with other funding. So the city will explore federal funds, state funds, regional funds, and any other funding source that could be available potentially as grants for similar projects. I should note that applying for those federal, state, regional grants, any of the funding sources really can happen after the project is defined.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. The next question is, what are the costs and construction timelines for various alternatives? And Millette, if you would take this one and introduce yourself.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Millette Litzinger, and I'm a project manager at AECOM, and I've been working on this project since we started this endeavor a couple years ago. So glad to be here tonight. The question that I've been asked to address is one related to cost and the construction timeline. And you can find all this information on all of the individual fact sheets, but there's a good place where all this is summarized. And Elliot, if you could take us back to the virtual town hall and show us the evaluation matrix and where that is. So in the evaluation matrix, there's 4 sheets, and the first 2 sheets are related to Meadow Charleston. And then the second 2 sheets are related to the Churchill alternatives. And in here, when you go to row J of the Churchill alternatives, you will see that row has the minimized disruption and duration of construction. So here's where you can see all three alternatives compared against each other here. For Churchill, related to timelines, the Churchill alternative will take, and the closure with mitigation as well as the viaduct will take about 2 years to construct. And then the partial underpass is expected to take approximately 2 to 3 years to construct. And that's because it's a bit more complicated. With the viaduct, we are building the structure over the roadways, but the roadways are staying where they are. But for the partial underpass, we are changing grades for both the roadways and for the railroad tracks. So that takes longer, and as I continue this conversation, you're going to see that is more has some cost impacts related to that too. Just below this row is the order of magnitude cost, and as you can see here, the closure is the least costly to construct at 50 to 65 million. And I know the question was asked, like, well, if we're closing it, why are there costs associated with that? And that's because Gary, as he answers some questions down the road, is going to talk about the mitigations that are needed to make sure that diversion of traffic is accommodated. So Elliot, maybe if you could just go back a second to the tabletop and show the Churchill closure. And what another question we've gotten asked related to Churchill is, there isn't an animation that you see in that entry screen, but in this wide out view, you can see two places on each side where you have like a traffic signal location. And that's indicating those modifications that need to be done related to the closure. So that's where we've highlighted the improvements that are needed for the Churchill closure. For the other alternatives, when you go back to the very main screen where Elliot was, we have full animations of all of those because we're constructing grade separation structures, and the construction is much more complicated. Continuing on in the discussion with the cost estimates, the next, we said closure was the least expensive. The partial underpass is next in the level of cost, and that's $160 million to $200 million. And then the viaduct is coming in at the most expensive at 300 to 400 million.
Great, thank you, Millette. All right, we're on to question number 8. Why is it assumed that the Churchill Avenue at grade crossing must close? And we thought we'd have our traffic person answer this one. So Gary, if you would introduce yourself and give some feedback on this topic. Gary, are you on mute?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Let me start again. Gary Black here with Hexagon Transportation Consultants, and we are part of the team with AECOM, specifically to look at transportation engineering, traffic engineering. So as I think Phil answered before, and maybe Elliot can show us the fact sheet again for Churchill, with increased Caltrain service, we're expecting a lot more gate downtime, which would result in much longer queues on Churchill and approaching Churchill when the gate is down. And you can get more information from the fact sheet when you look there. But so queues would be extended to El Camino, and also it could take 5 signal cycles, for example, to turn towards towards Palo Alto High School in the morning. So, and also, as I'm sure you're aware, there are hundreds of bicycles and pedestrians that use that crossing before and after school. And so that in conjunction with the increased train service leads us to conclude that something needs to be done. Now, what that something is, there are options. And no, Churchill does not need to be closed. As you just heard, there are 2 other options that would keep Churchill open. One of those is the viaduct, in which the train would be taken over Churchill. And so the intersection as it is today would remain. Churchill would be open. There just wouldn't be any interruption with the train. So there would be no gate downtime. Similarly, with the underpass option, it would be the same thing. The traffic would be separated from the train tracks. And so the train service wouldn't affect the traffic operations.
Great, thank you, Gary. All right, our next question, number 9. is whether or not there's been any coordination with Stanford, and has Stanford and Palo Alto Unified School District commented publicly on the proposed closure option? And I'm going to ask Phil to take that from the city.
Thanks, Eileen. PAUSD and Stanford have been outreached to and have received information on the project and the alternatives. Stanford has not provided the city with any feedback as of yet. We have received some feedback from PAUSD, but they have not taken any formal position on any of the alternatives as of yet.
Okay, thank you. Question number 10. Has adequate analysis been done to evaluate how rerouting the traffic due to the closure will impact other neighborhoods? Gary, this sounds like a question for you.
Yes, that's back to me. And yes, we have done extensive analysis of this, and I think Elliot will show us where you can access the traffic study in the virtual town hall. So he's pointing right there, and you can download the traffic study and look at all the analysis in there about the traffic patterns and what will happen if Churchill were to be closed. So Elliot, if you could go to the page where we talk about the traffic patterns. There was a lot of research done figuring out where cars are coming from and where they're going to that are using the crossing now. And there it is. You can stop there. I'm not going to spend time going over this diagram. It's very complicated, and I urge you to go to the virtual town hall, spend some time with the traffic study, and you can study these diagrams that show the traffic patterns of traffic that's using Churchill today. So what would happen is that traffic would either go to Embarcadero or to Page Mill, Oregon, which are the closest crossings to Churchill. If you couldn't cross at Churchill, you'd go to one of those. A little more traffic would go to Embarcadero than Page Mill because Embarcadero is closer. In order to get to those other crossings, the traffic could use Alma Street. We're not expecting the traffic would need to cut through any neighborhoods to access those other streets, with one exception or caveat, and that is up at the intersection of Embarcadero and Alma. And Elliot, if you could go to the diagram of that intersection. As you know, it's a very complex intersection. I'm going to call it an interchange, but not all of the movements are possible with ramps today. Some of the movements require the use of local streets, such as Lincoln Avenue or Emerson Street, in order to make the connections. And we recognize that if Churchill were closed, the existing configuration of that interchange would not be adequate to accommodate the traffic that would be diverted to this location. Not to mention the fact that all that added traffic on Lincoln and Emerson would not be acceptable to that neighborhood. Therefore, as Millette indicated, there's a lot of additional construction that would go along with the closure. And a lot of that would be here at this interchange, where this would be rebuilt with new connections, especially along Kingsley, to accommodate the movements between the two streets without using local neighborhood streets. And also Alma would be widened over Embarcadero Road. And so I realize it's a lot to digest to look at this figure. There's a lot going on here. So again, I would encourage you to go to the virtual town hall and study this figure so you can become familiar with the improvements that would be necessary to accommodate the diverted traffic.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
Back to you, Eileen.
Thank you. All right, question number 11. Has the traffic analysis been done regarding the traffic diversions that impact the bike pedestrian routes north of Embarcadero Road? And there's a side note to this question when we got it on the virtual town hall that said more traffic will flow down the 1100 block of Emerson that runs perpendicular to the bike path. And if you could speak to that, Gary, I think you're the right person for the job. Yeah,
and if Ellie could put up our diagram again, this is another question relating to the design of this particular interchange between Alma and Embarcadero. we are aware that, that it's a major bike route for students to Palo Alto High School, and also Stanford students that use Embarcadero. And also we are aware that the city has studied this corridor before and has come up with a plan to make bicycle improvements along that corridor. And so this design that you see here, it could accommodate the planned improvements to the bicycle network that the city already has on the books. And again, if you take a closer look at this in the traffic study, you can see what is planned there. But I guess to summarize, well, the second part of that question is, what about increased traffic on Emerson Street? And again, that would happen if no improvements were made here. But the intent of these improvements is that traffic would not need to use Emerson Street. So there would not be an increase in on Emerson Street. In fact, we even hoped there would be a decrease. And so that interface between the bicycles and increased traffic on Emerson, that would not come to pass. So to summarize, we are aware of the bicycles using that corridor, and this interchange can be designed to accommodate that bicycle travel.
Okay, thanks,
All right,
Gary.
back to you, Eileen.
Thank you. All right, now we're up to question number 12. And question number 12 is, will Embarcadero Road be modified going under Alma when the bridge is widened? And this could apply to the closure or the partial underpass. And I'm going to ask Peter to answer this question. Peter, if you would introduce yourself and walk us through the answer to this one.
Sure, you bet. Thanks, Eileen. My name is Peter DiStefano. I'm a civil engineer with AECOM. And let's take a look at the next slide where we show a cross-section or profile, if you will, of Embarcadero. This is looking north. So Emerson to the right of this image here. This is the existing profile where we go into a sag underneath the bridge at Alma Street. And this has an existing vertical clearance of 14 feet. So if we do a bridge widening on Alma, that would reduce the vertical clearance. So yes, the answer to this question is yes, we'd have to do a modification of the Embarcadero Road profile. The low point of the curve would get shifted slightly, so we'd have to do some drainage modifications. But this modification would give us the vertical clearance that we need at the edge of the new widened structure.
Great. All right, now question 13. For closure option 1, could a U-shaped bike ped underpass be considered rather than a U-shape? And I think, Peter, you're the right person to answer this one as well.
Yeah, so before I dive into the answer for this one, we could go to the next slide here. This shows here the existing, the configuration for option 1. And really the intent and goal for option 1 was to just provide a tunnel or separation under the tracks and not provide one that went under Alma Street as well. That was really the goal for option 2. So you can see there in yellow and brown, the U-shaped tunnel and ramp structure. So if you do a click here, Elliot, this is the L-shaped configuration that is asked in this question. So this could be done where you begin the ramp roughly, behind the high school there, behind the bleachers at that point, and then you would descend down and then go underneath the tracks and Alma. This is really more of a variant of option 2. So I think the short answer to this question is no, we can't do this for option 1, but this could be a potential modification for option 2. Just to add on to this, if you do a mirror image of this, that's essentially the configuration that is presented for the partial underpass, where we ramp down to the north near Kellogg, and then we have the tunnel, the ped bike tunnel, go underneath the tracks and underneath Alma, and then descend up in daylight in the center of Kellogg.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Okay, we're moving on to question number 14, which is how long will Churchill Avenue, Embarcadero Road, and or Alma Street be closed during construction for each alternative? Millette, could you take this one?
Yes. So this one, we have looked at this, and this information is actually on all of the individual fact sheets for the alternatives. We note not only the duration of closures, but we also denote the reduction in lanes. So Elliot, if you could go pick to where the fact sheets are for the individual alternatives, just pick one of the Churchill ones, that'd be great. Each of the fact sheets has a area called neighborhood considerations, and that is where we have highlighted what any of these roadway closures or reductions in lanes would be during construction. So to highlight or summarize each one, for the closure, Embarcadero Road, Alma Street, and Churchill Avenue will be closed intermittently at nights and on weekends during construction. It's somewhat similar for the Viaduct as well. They will have intermittent at night and weekend closures, but it will just be limited to Alma Street and Churchill Avenue. Impacts to the partial underpass are a bit more than the other two alternatives. And for the partial underpass, Churchill Avenue between Alma Street and Mariposa would likely be closed for the majority of the construction. And if you remember when I answered the previous question about construction timelines, we indicated that the partial underpass had a duration of 2.5 to 3 years. Another impact to local streets related to the partial underpass during construction is that Alma Street will be one-way northbound for approximately 6+ months.
Great, thank you. All right, we're on to question number 15. So what is the process for Caltrain to consider allowing a greater than 1% grade for the railroad alignment for the viaduct? Let, could you speak to this as well?
Yeah, so in the virtual town hall, we do have an easel to the right side of the room where we show communications that we have had back and forth with Caltrain related to the project. It includes their business plan, and then it's their booklet for Palo Alto for the business plan, and then various email communications. And the one on the far right there about the grade is the one where we posed several questions. The city posed several questions to Caltrain and they responded. So the situation that we have in the viaduct is that a 1% grade for the railroad alignment is proposed. And per Caltrain's design standards, 1% is the maximum allowed. Caltrain has indicated that they do have an established process for requesting design variances. And they also noted that the requester is responsible for the cost to support the review and analysis of a request. And some of that analysis that would be required, supporting documentation that would need to be prepared. And this would be to evaluate the impacts to operations, vehicle performance, and vehicles, meaning the trains, and maintenance. We would also have to do some study related to the site-specific conditions, such as how close are you to a station would need to be considered. So the city would engage Caltrain in evaluating the design variances once a preferred alternative is identified.
Great, thank you, Millette. And our final question, question 16, for the partial underpass, why is the bike ped undercrossing at Kellogg Avenue? Could it be at Churchill Avenue or at Seale? Peter.
Yeah, you bet. So for this one here, since for the partial underpass, we're actually lowering the Alma intersection into like a T intersection. So to go underneath a lowered intersection really isn't feasible. So there was two reasons why we placed the undercrossing at Kellogg. One was to really provide a separate crossing while the construction is being done at Churchill, so pedestrians and bicyclists could cross Alma and cross the tracks during construction. And then two, the original concept for the partial underpass had pedestrians crossing at grade over across northbound Alma, and then on a bridge over southbound Alma, over a lowered southbound Alma. And then it connected to a very similar configuration that we show in option 1 for the Churchill closure. So that was initially presented. So the advantage of having it at Kellogg was that we eliminate the ped-bike conflict for traffic on Alma. Now, that said, I know there's been a lot of feedback from the community about, hey, can we do the crossing at Seale instead? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. So that is something that could be studied in the next phase of work, that we could look at an undercrossing at Seale with maybe a similar configuration that's shown at Kellogg, where we daylight in the center of Seale Avenue, and on the other side of the tracks have some sort of plaza or opening at Seale Park on the west side of the tracks.
Great, thanks, Peter. And thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. And again, as we mentioned, we're very excited to do this type of a session again next week. And we'll be focused on the Meadow-Charleston grade separation alternatives. As I mentioned at the opening of this meeting, we will be updating our statistics that are coming in through the virtual town hall. And that virtual town hall will remain open and accepting comments through Labor Day. So there's plenty of time to get out into the room and look at all the documents we tried to highlight for you this afternoon, and to let us know what you think about all these different options and alternatives. And as was said by Phil from the city, it's the goal of the city to bring this to council still during 2020 in the fall. So it's very important to get your feedback in now. And again, we really appreciate your attendance here today, and thank you very much. We are now adjourned.